transcribe or something.
Hello, everyone.
Or like a meter.
Thank you all for being here fairly early on a Monday morning at our reInvent discussion. This is session MAM104, AWS for VMware Migration, Successes, Roadmaps, and Strategies. My name is Boatner Blankenstein. I'm a senior worldwide go-to-market specialist at AWS. I'm focused on our customers running VMware workloads. AWS meets customers where they are in their VMware modernization journey. We offer a comprehensive set of migration pathways, including AWS native services, partner offerings, and purpose-built migration tools to help streamline your migration to the cloud. Customers can relocate with their VMware workloads with Amazon EVS, which is our newly announced elastic VMware service. It's now in technical preview. EVS allows you to run VMware workloads, your VMware Cloud Foundation directly in your Amazon VPC. Or you could rehost workloads with EC2, containerize or replatform with managed services, or refactor with modern applications. Or if you have on-premises needs, you can do that with Amazon Outposts. But today, I'm very excited to host this panel discussion. We're privileged to have three of our esteemed customers with us today who will be sharing interesting insights from their VMware to AWS migration journeys. We'll hear about strategies, successes, future plans, but also we'll discuss some unique challenges and lessons learned, which may help guide your own migration. So let's get started with a quick introduction from each of our panelists. First, we have Matthew Daubertine, Senior Director of Technology Infrastructure at Tribune Publishing. Matthew, can you start us off? Tell us a little bit about Tribune and your role there.
Sure. So I'm obviously, as you heard, I'm Matthew Daubertine. I've been with Tribune Publishing for 23 years. A variety of roles, obviously, starting from an admin all the way up to now directing all of the infrastructure management across servers, data centers, databases, network, telecom, you name it, it's in my scope. So that's
right.
My day-to-day.
Thank you, Matthew. Next, we have Matthew Kozlowski, Infrastructure Engineering Lead at Stericycle. Matthew, can you tell us about Stericycle and your responsibilities there?
Yep, so Stericycle, medical waste recycle company. My responsibilities are, I'm our lead infrastructure engineer, so we're responsible for everything in our data centers. So server OS, backups, SANs, NetApp, everything.
Great.
That goes in and out of our data centers, including our AWS footprint today.
Great. Gotcha. Thank you. And finally, we have Frank Fioretti, Principal Infrastructure Architect at Huron Consulting Group. Frank, could you give us a brief introduction to Huron and what you do there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in Huron for almost 11 years. I've had a variety of different roles. I came in as an analyst, and I'm currently the Principal Infrastructure Architect in our corporate IT team. I've managed many different things over the years, but now I primarily focus on cloud, hybrid cloud, within that primarily on AWS. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Well, since this is a silent session, we can't have any live Q&A, but I thought we'd do a little audience participation. So maybe with a show of hands, how many of you are actively investigating a migration of VMware workloads to AWS? A good number. How about how many of you have used the AWS application migration tool, MGM, migration service? Great. Well, I think you're going to benefit a lot from the conversation today. So Matthew, let's get started with Tribune Publishing. Can you, from our discussions, it sounds like you've been planning your cloud migration for a number of years. Could you tell us your story?
Sure. So, a little bit about Tribune. You can see it on the slide, obviously, but we're a multi-tiered, publication organization. Tribune Publishing is primarily eight publications, but we have locations also with our sister company, Media News Group, across the country, east to west, running newspapers everywhere. So we're very very diverse and one of the largest newspaper organizations in the country. So from a migration perspective, our AWS journey started in 2017 from my team's perspective, and at the time, we were looking primarily at how do we replace our DR environment, right? How do we figure out, we've got a data center which might be closing, which is in Los Angeles. How do we prepare for that? How do we put the right things in place? So we partnered with TCS. We were utilizing them as our outsourcer at the time. So we partnered with them, built out an architecture, built out all the things that you need in order to make the cloud work, right? So all your VPCs, all the different account structure, making sure we had a way to get in and that we had single sign-on, all those things we got set up in the initial conversation with them. So that was very, very helpful. And then we started, as I said, doing some activity for DR. In about 2018, we sold off the LA Times, which was one of our largest newspapers at the time. And as I said, they hosted a data center for us. So we immediately had to plan on closing that data center. That brought a few things back to our data center in Chicago, but we also said, hey, maybe this is an opportunity for us to start thinking about moving things to the cloud. We partnered at the time with a different cloud provider, so I won't go into too many details there, but we moved to a different cloud. Sure. We had good and bad experiences there, so it's different pieces of that. And eventually, about 3 years later, we had moved around 300 VMs over into that environment. And about 3 years later, it came up and we said, hey, we're coming up on a new contract, and they're saying, hey, your number is going to go way up because our agreement with Microsoft changed, and so your price for Microsoft licensing is changing. So that's when we had to have some conversations about what do we do with these workloads, right? So at the time, hey, we moved them to VMware on that cloud platform, and that allowed us to bring our own licenses and a license that we had already paid for, and so we didn't have to worry about it. And then once we completed that piece, we got a bunch of things done, and then came the integration, because as Tribune Publishing, we got purchased by the company that owns Media News Group. So at that time, we had to talk about how do we. I started to look at their infrastructure and see opportunities as well. From a Media News Group perspective, they have a co-located data center, which hosts about 400 VMs. It was probably, I think it was 5 to 6 when we started, but it keeps winnowing itself down. And so we started to have some conversations about where do we go next, right? Do we look at migrating to the cloud we're already in? We already have a presence in AWS. Do we migrate over there? Do we stay in the colo facility and move everything back, right? And stay on a VMware environment, which is, and make that work. We did, like many people, and I think you'll hear from the others today, we've got equipment that's in that data center that's coming up on end of life, so we've got a plan for replacement. So, at that point, I started to put together, hey, what are my costs to maintain what I have, to buy the equipment I need to replace this, to figure out, what all the different things I need to run that data center, because it's not just my colo costs, it's not just my server costs. I've got to have the networking infrastructure there. I've got to have circuits so that I can get bandwidth out and share things out to the world. There's a lot of different things that I need to make sure. So I had to capture all those costs, understand what they were, and then start to take the resources that I had there and say, hey, what will it cost me to run these in the cloud? And there are a lot of ways you can accomplish that. Amazon will certainly help you with that, and we'll run some analysis with you.
Did you do a formal optimization and licensing assessment in OLA with Amazon?
We sort of did.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say we did a formal
Iterative.
one. You have the option to install a tool in your VMware environment, and it will capture all the details and go through the whole thing. We've had mixed results with that, so we just gave them an RV tools, and that way we had the same thing to all of our different vendors.
Because you were bidding it out.
Yep, bidding it out.
Gotcha.
And that allowed us to say, okay, here's, say, and look at what those costs would be and how they would compare. And we went through it, and our initial thought was, well, let's move to VMware. We're using VMware in the other cloud. We were looking at it in VMware. We were looking at VMware in Oracle Cloud, in Amazon Cloud, and Google Cloud, and looking at all those options. And when I went through that, I was like, well, the pricing is good, but I wonder what will it look like if I put this on native. And around the same time, and again, you'll hear more from others, is when changes happened with Broadcom, and it just changes in how they were licensing and things going on, and so that changed how we had to approach things. So in looking at that, we determined that, let's look at native and see how that will work for us and what that will look like. We had already done some native migrations when we did our DR migration, so we're familiar with the process of going from VMware to AWS native. So we went through that process with the different vendors. One of them didn't want us to go that way. They wanted us to go to VMware anyway, and actually two of them wanted us to go that way. And Amazon offered us a native option that also allowed us, and something that was important to us now because we have some existing contracts, was to bring our own licenses as well for the Windows Server piece of it.
Gotcha.
So that's not necessarily an easy thing to do, and I can talk a little bit more about that later. But in doing that, we were able to look at that, and then we also said, hey, why don't we consolidate our clouds, close out what we've got in the VMware on our other cloud provider, and move those resources over into AWS as well, and get a bid on that and see what that looks like. And when we compared that with what it would cost us on-prem, we're looking at a $1.3 million savings over 5 years for moving to Amazon as opposed to managing it on-prem and buying our own equipment. Not to mention, because I'm not including this in the costs, but it also has significant impacts on the amount of work my team has to do. One of the things that I've had to go through, I'll say this as kind of a high-level thing because I say this all the time. We're a newspaper organization. I'll ask the question to you. How many of you get a newspaper subscription and have it delivered to your house? And that's why things are challenging. I don't get it delivered to my house either. Let me ask a different question. How many of you subscribe to a newspaper online? Okay, still a relatively small group in comparison. That's some of the challenges we're dealing with, right? So as we're continuing to shrink that print footprint, we have to also look at what do we do from a technology perspective? How do we continue to deliver the services that we need to deliver? But and I'm sure you guys all have the same challenge as well, do it with fewer people. So cloud helps me do that because I don't have to manage all that underlying infrastructure, so I can hand all that off. So I think those were some of my top points.
Right, so where are you in your migration right now?
So right now, over this past summer, we moved out of our other cloud providers. So in about 2 months, we moved 250 VMs. I have one guy, he's sitting out here in the crowd, who did all that work. So in 2 months, he migrated those. We used the Amazon MGN service primarily to do that. There were a number, and again, one other thing to keep in mind: you don't have to use the migration service for everything, right? There are things where it doesn't make sense. It's much easier sometimes to build new and just transfer the data over. So keep that in mind when you're planning things out. So that we completed, and then the additional 400 VMs, we're planning to migrate those before August of next year. And right now we're in the process of building out that infrastructure because we're separate companies, making sure that we have ways to account for that appropriately, but also be able to share resources among us.
Thank you, Matthew. That was really insightful. Let's move on to Matthew at Stericycle. You have two Matthews.
Yeah, we have two. Yeah. So Stericycle, our journey started very similar time frames. We started in 2019. We had done an analysis of just kind of our data centers as a whole. We started looking at
You had an interesting set of circumstances, I think, to deal with.
We did. I'll get into those. I'll get into those as I kind of go through the timeline a little bit. But in 2019, we started doing an analysis looking at all of our data centers. What do we have everywhere? We had about 22 data centers globally. Mismatch across the board. Mismatch of hardware, VMware versions, things along those lines. So we really wanted to level set on everything, and so we started in 2019. We brought in a couple different vendors, and we had picked a third-party colo to, house our hardware, do the VMware stack and below. So we started migrating and reducing our data centers at that point. Jump ahead, we reduced by 2023. We had reduced down from 22 to about 12 data centers, so almost 50% reduction. And at that point, we had just started building out an Amazon data center as well. So we already kind of had our networking infrastructure. We had maybe about 10, 15 VMs in there, like dipping our toes in just to see how do we like it, how is it working for us, things along those lines. Well, in 2023, we had started our contract. We knew our contract was coming up in about a year with our third-party hosted VMware solution, at least for North America here. And we had started going down the avenue of looking at VMC over AWS. And our problem with that one, and this is the fun part of it, as we were going through those motions, for us, VMC over AWS would have been a very simple lift shift. You move IPs over, you move the VMs just as they are. We can get off the on-premise, get out of our kind of contractual agreements that we had with the third-party colo. And as we started going through those in, I think it was March, April, VMware kind of told us we were going to be leveraging their CloudFlex storage. So they're like, oh, well, we're not doing the CloudFlex storage anymore. So we started shifting gears and looking at the NetApp, what is it, FXS?
FSX,
within AWS, right? Because we have a lot of storage, not a ton of VMs. Our storage to VM ratio is way higher on the storage side. So
just a question on that. Do you have NetApp storage on-prem today?
We do have NetApp today on-prem. So it would have been an easy shift over, replicate VMs up, things along those lines, if we wanted to go that route. Or we were going to leveraging HCX within the VMC platform. So we got through all those contract agreements and everything, and then we signed everything, submitted our paperwork at the end of April. May, VMware, Broadcom, I guess I should say, stopped all new customers. So right in the middle of us planning, 6 months of planning, app mapping, architecting, designing, going VMC over AWS, VMware put a stop, no new customers. So we had to immediately shift.
Right at the wrong time.
Right at the wrong time, 100% at the wrong time. So we had to shift gears, and me and my team, we're not a big team. There's only 5 of us. We manage the infrastructure pretty much globally for Stericycle. And we had to shift gears, and we got in touch with our AWS rep, and we signed up, I'm gonna get it wrong, EBA?
Oh, yes.
Yes, so we had started an EBA program.
Experience-based accelerator.
Yep, experience-based accelerated program with Amazon and our account rep, which basically they came in, they said, no, we can move, we have very old VMs from legacy to, up to date, 2022 VMs, and the EBA allowed us to get in. They came on-prem, took a quick analysis. We didn't run through an official OLA, just an RV Tools report because we had such a short time frame. Because again, we're hitting May, our contract ended end of July. We did not want to renew that contract. So thinking, going VMC, we were good, but then we lost like a whole month of May trying to shift gears and come up with a new strategy. And with the EBA program, they got us in, they level set with us, they ran through setting up MGN, running through some test examples, some dev servers we set up. They helped us right on the phone. Sat down through multiple meetings with them. It was fantastic. So then we started moving our VMs from our colo right at the very end of June, so like the last week of June, and we completed 5 move windows, so about 450 VMs by the end of July. So
that's pretty quick.
We shut down our main data center. We still have a small footprint in our DR facility today. We're kind of still running our app dev QA. Just we weighed the cost analysis between leaving it there and putting it up in the cloud. It didn't make sense yet. We are going to do that. So by Q2 of next year, we're hoping to move up our dev instance up into Amazon. We're hitting a lot of problems at the moment, trying to refresh the data between Amazon and on-prem. Going to Amazon was easy. Coming back out is a little more difficult. To get it back on-prem is doable 100%, but just hitting some, taking a lot longer than it should. And then what else? We had, yeah, that's pretty much.
So did you?
Sorry. Yeah.
Did you have any cost savings involved with
Oh,
this
we
as
did,
well?
yeah. So apologies on that. Yeah. So we when we did our analysis from our on-prem colo to Amazon Cloud, it actually saves us about $2.2 million a year. Yes, that is a year. We were paying quite a bit in the overhead for the managed colo. Again, they did our VMware stacking down.
So that's inclusive of the management and the licensing.
That is inclusive of all the management and everything. So we took all of that back on to my team. We took all the responsibility then. We're still managing the OS layer and up, but now we're adding in the AWS pieces. So managing that networking infrastructure and stuff.
Awesome. That's a great story. That was a really rapid move for a very small team.
Yeah, we didn't have a lot of time. Unfortunately, our contract was August 1st. Contract ended, so and it's an automatic renew for a year if we're not out. So when VMware or Broadcom kind of said no new customers, we immediately had to shift gears. So we reached out to our AWS rep and ran through that.
So quick question on that. So in moving 450 VMs in that time frame, I always find the biggest challenge isn't the technical considerations in moving them, but getting Windows, dealing with all your customers. How challenging was that for you in terms of being able to find a time when you could move these?
So it wasn't too bad because we started again in 2019. So we already had our application mappings and stuff done, these VMs, these apps, so we could kind of containerize it. So we can shut down this app for this period of time on a Friday night. Everything we did from a main accounting or front-end facing app or anything along those lines was all done on a Friday night. So we'd fail over to DR if we needed to, or if it's only an internal app, we just let the internal teams know we're down. And it's all Friday night, and by Saturday morning we were already up and running in Amazon.
Nice.
So it was very quick. But because we had those app mappings and that containerization of these servers, these DNS IPs, these firewalls we have to update here and there, and we were already in Amazon, so it was relatively easy. All of our Palos were in there.
What was your connectivity from on-prem or for your hosting?
So we spun up a temporary 10 gig a NetBond connection. Amazon can spin them up pretty quick as long as they're with your vendor. So we spun that up, gave our own private replication subnet. So it was that's all it rode was just the replication, the MGN replication. And then as we cut over, then we would start leveraging our actual direct connects. So as the app users came in from VPN or whatever, and then the other data centers or the other facilities would then come up through our direct connects.
Gotcha.
So we did put in a temporary 10 gig circuit just to accelerate that MGN traffic.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you. Now, Frank, I know that Huron took more of a two-step approach to your migration. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, the journey started 10 years ago when I first logged into the AWS console for the first time to set up a server for somebody who wanted to POC something. But we had a similar situation in that our data center contracts were coming up in 2023. Our hardware was already beyond its standard life cycle, so we would have to rebuy essentially everything in our primary data center as well as in our secondary data center. And so with a change in senior leadership at our CIO level, we kind of had a new strategy and a new vision of where we wanted to go. And we kind of used those expiration dates and that product life cycle to push that forward. So sometime in 2020, 2021, we started kicking around the idea, and then we firmly decided at the senior leadership level that this is what we're going to do. We're not going to renew our data center in 2 years. We have 2 years to move everything that we have out of our data centers and up to VMC on AWS. And we evaluated VMC versus EC2 at the time, and because we had about 3,000 workloads, about 3,000 VMs or so, because of the time frame, and we also had a pretty small team. In fact, 90% of them are in the second row. But we had a very small team to actually execute the majority of these migrations. And so we were a VMware shop on-prem. We had VMware expertise. And we were still building out our AWS native team and our automation and et cetera. And so we decided to leverage VMC on AWS as that first step. Now, the longer term strategy has always been and still is to use that as a stepping stone to give ourselves more time to refactor what we can, modernize what we can, and then ultimately convert and move from VMC to EC2. But we were able to move 3,000 VMs or so in about 2 years, leveraging technologies like you mentioned via HCX, network stretching so we could maintain IP address space, replication between our on-premises VMware and VMC, and we leveraged we have multiple 10 gig direct connects that we use to facilitate the connectivity over. But the intangibles, the finances of doing that, of going from on-prem to VMC, were pretty close. There wasn't going to be a big tangible financial reduction, but all of the things that you don't think about and you don't know about unless you manage a data center, going and replacing cables, updating firmware, dealing with a critical zero day on Cisco hardware or HP hardware or whatever, all of that scrambling and things like that, all of that sort of just goes away. It's abstracted from us. Yeah. And we're able to leverage the team that we have much more effectively while still continuing to use the subject matter expertise because it's still a VMware solution. We're still using very much the same technology or very similar technology under the hood. And so as part of doing the migration, one of the big things for us was Huron is made up of multiple business verticals that all have their own P&L, they all have their own goals, their own revenue streams, and their own margins. But for the equipment and the IT expenses, all of that is centralized or was centralized through corporate IT. And so when you have an app team that's developing an application and they're operating at whatever percent margin they think they're operating at, well, all of those costs for the data center are going through an entirely different division. And so we had no way to tell our application teams, your app costs this amount of money to run on a monthly or yearly basis. And because when you have a data center, generally you have a data center, you have a SAN, you have multiple clusters for compute. And how do you break that down? You could use something like VROPS and put in some fake numbers and get close, right? But where do you stop? Did your app use this many gigabits of bandwidth this month? How do you charge back for that, et cetera? So understanding the margins and the real cost basis of our hosted applications was extremely difficult for us. Moving to VMC and then to EC2, we were able to split all of those things out. We created multiple SDDCs for our different business verticals. And so now they have a bill. They have a line items of exactly what their footprint costs them. But it's still only at the macro level of the business unit. Now, we completed our migration to VMC in 2023, about April of 2023. And for me, corporate IT was one of those multiple SDDCs that we created, and so we had our own bill. For me, the clock of getting out of the data center ended in April in 2023. The clock of getting out of VMC started in April of 2023. And so by April of this year, of 2024, we were able to migrate all of the corporate IT resources out of our SDDC to EC2, something around 250 VMs or so over to EC2. And we heavily leverage the AWS MGN tool to do that. We always had a plan, a rough outline of getting off of VMC into EC2 and what that timeline might look like. And that plan was essentially, as our host subscriptions expire in VMC, we want to have migrated enough resources where we don't have to resubscribe. We can get rid of that host and sort of slowly wean ourselves off of VMC over to EC2. Well, in May, that changed a bit. Our incentive became much more rapid to make sure that we could get off of VMC on time and not renew any subscriptions, because our cost basis on VMC was heavily balanced on the 3-year subscription pricing that we were taking advantage of. And as we all know, that went away. Or maybe we don't know, but you can now only get 1-year subscriptions in VMC, which completely changed our cost model. So before, it was an outline or a suggestion of, yeah, we're going to shoot to get rid of this many resources or migrate this many resources over and not resubscribe hosts. But now it became a financial imperative. And so between April and now, so we migrated, our corporate got rid of our SDDC in April of this year. Between April and now, we are migrating roughly 300 VMs a month over from VMC to EC2. And that is almost exclusively using the MGN tool. So we've gotten a lot of experience using MGN, and I highly recommend every one of you gets experience with it if you don't have it already. But it allowed us to move very rapidly and move a tremendous amount of resources and data from our VMC presence over to EC2. And really, the more you put into the planning of that, we were able to leverage network extension between on-prem and VMC. Unfortunately, we can't leverage network extension between VMC and EC2. So I don't know if any of you have ever run into a random IP address being hard-coded in a config somewhere. I'm sure that's just us. But planning and understanding those things and doing the due diligence ahead of time to identify where your workloads, what's talking to your workloads, and Amazon has tools to help you with that. Understanding what those things are, what those challenges you might run into when you actually go to cut over. All that prep work is going to save you during the actual migration, the actual cutover, and that's how we were able to get such a velocity. Because the corporate team, we were experienced at this. We moved all of our own VMs before we ever even started moving our various business units VMs. And so we were able to leverage that expertise to really keep the ball rolling.
So you talked about separating out costs and doing some things there. So obviously, like you said, you've got your corporate stuff moved into Amazon. How do you segregate those costs by application? Do you do that at the VPC level? Do you do that at the tag level? What's your plan for that?
Within corporate, we don't have applications that we charge back for.
Okay.
Right? It's generally critical infrastructure, domain controllers, certificate authorities, et cetera, that we don't charge back for. So for us, it's just one bill. We have one account that we really moved all of our stuff into. For the businesses, we create generally speaking, multiple accounts per application.
Okay.
We have a dev, test, QA, some of them have UAT, prod, there's between 4 and 6 accounts generally for our application teams per application. And then we do that for each application. And so at the end of the month, we have these breakouts of all of the accounts that belong to a given business unit, and you can see my development environment for this application in this month costs this much, and this is how much my test, this is how much my prod. We don't leverage tagging intra-account very often, simply because we've broken things out by account so cleanly that we don't generally have a need to do it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, and so going from on-prem to VMC was a roughly net equivalent cost, not including the intangibles, time, effort, manageability. Going from VMC to EC2, we're seeing about a 20% cost reduction over VMC.
That's pretty good. Thank you for sharing your story and all those details. I'd like to move on to I think the audience would like to understand more of the lessons learned from each of you. I mean, we picked up on a few along the way here, but let's focus on that. Matthew, with your experience at Tribune, could you share some things that you think people should keep in mind when they're doing their migrations?
A few different things, and I know we kind of talked ahead of time, so we kind of share some things as well. So I'd say the first thing on my side, little things. When you're doing migrations, as I said before, you don't have to move everything, and you don't have to move everything using the migration tool, right? So use this as an opportunity to look at what you have in your environment and reduce your infrastructure. When we started with 3,000 VMs in 2017, and on the Tribune side, and we're down to just over 600 now. That's all through attrition, but it also goes with our strategy and some of the other things we're doing, which I'll get into later. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And I know we'll talk, because I think Frank, you were talking about this a little bit. The when you move from VMware on-prem or VMware somewhere else to Amazon, it can be a total change in how people have to think about how you manage the environment. You're no longer managing, you're not managing the physical infrastructure anymore. B, you're very comfortable with how things work in a VMware environment, right? And how that all plays out. It's different in Amazon. But more importantly, you're not just managing a small part of the stack, you're managing the whole stack. You may not have been managing routing rules or handling, how do I get this from here back to my data center? You've got to learn some new networking skills. You've got to learn other skills that you never had to play into before. You might have had a storage team that was dedicated to managing your storage, and now it's all built in.
Not to mention JSON, YAML, IAM policies. That whole ball of yarn to unwind, right?
We were just discussing the timeliness of a new prescriptive guidance that AWS has come out with, a prescriptive guidance for VMware administrators.
Yeah, there's a new article. It came out about 2 days ago. If you can find it easily by Googling it, but it's AWS prescriptive guidance on EC2 specifically for VMware administrators. And it lays out tables of what things are called on the VMware side, the equivalents on the AWS side. I sent it over to our VMware admins internally, and they loved it. So I think it's a really useful tool.
Yeah. Matthew, how about Stericycle? What are some lessons learned there that you could share with us?
So similar to Matt, right? Understanding your environment is huge. I mean, we had the similar thing where as we were kind of moving things up to Amazon, we're like, does it make sense that we have this many of X, right? So we were able to reduce maybe about 15% of our infrastructure as we kind of moved it up. A lot of it we did move up just because we were on a very short timeline. Right. And as we got it into Amazon, we kind of reviewed it after the next several months. So the last several months for us, we've actually powered off probably maybe about 30, 35 VMs out of the 500 or so that we had in there. So it's a good reduction. And another big lessons learned for us, and it's more so a good lessons learned, we had a lot of issues with some of our legacy OSs. We just couldn't get MGN to replicate appropriately. Amazon has more than just MGN to migrate things up. So for us, we actually leveraged exporting out the VMware as a flat file, as an OVA, and then imported that directly into Amazon. I don't know what they call it or anything.
VM import.
Is it just VM import?
Yeah, it's called VM import.
Yeah, I know it's just that you have to do it through Cloud Shell, stuff like that.
Well, you get to do it through Cloud Shell now. It used to be a much more interesting experience.
That's true. But it allowed us to take the actual VM as it was, very similar to MGN, and because we were having some issues with that and a couple Linux boxes, just export it straight out of VMware, upload it in Amazon, and then deploy it right from there. So that's another big lessons learned for us. The biggest one for us was understanding, as Frank was mentioning, IP addressing. IP addressing was huge. We hit so many little issues where we found some config files, this app wouldn't come online, because we did have to change IPs. We did. And for us, we did have one thing that helped us. So we moved some of our telephony platform, our call center up into Amazon, running on EC2 native. And if you've ever worked on anything telephony, it's mainly IP-based. It doesn't like names most of the time, things along those lines. So in our case, thankfully, on the VM platform, it was all in one subnet range. Nice. So we were able to, on the VM platform, get everything for that whole stack in that range, replicated, synced up, and the day we went to cut that over, we actually stopped advertising it out of VMware, built a pre-staged environment in Amazon, didn't advertise it. moved the VMs up, and then advertised it as we were doing the MGN migration. So we were actually able to keep those same IPs for our call center platform.
Gotcha. Just took some planning.
It just took a little more planning, yeah, a little more planning. We did have to shut the entirety of it down, unfortunately. We couldn't nitpick little pieces of it. It was a big bang.
Standing in the back room holding the big switch, getting
Yes,
ready to...
exactly.
Okay, shutting all the phones off.
We're shutting
now.
everything off, Rob. So that one, again, there's many ways to skin the cat with this one, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Frank, what about you?
I think that one of the biggest things that I've learned throughout the process and really throughout the journey with AWS is that the people that you work with, if you sense first of all, as the AWS expert in whatever work that you're in or within whatever company that you're in, some of the responsibility is on you to build and foster and nurture the excitement and the understanding and the interest in the platform. Even if it's something that they don't end up liking or going with, but it's up to you as that subject matter expert to bring people in, to encourage them, to give them tips, tell them things to go look at, videos to watch, certifications they should pursue, but really, really, really helping and encouraging the people that you work with, especially some of the folks that are VMware administrators. VMware administrators that have been that for 20 years, 25 years. And now, as we're looking to potentially move off of the VMware platform, those folks have the opportunity to upskill and learn the next best thing, the next thing that in the cards, the AWS platform. And so it's a huge opportunity to, number one, retain people, and number two, put that subject matter expertise to work in a new area. The other big thing I will say is, one, like Matt said, AWS doesn't just have MGN, right? AWS, and even within MGN, there are multiple flavors. We did an entire data closet migration of 300 VMs and 100 terabytes of data in 45 days using rolling snowballs and VM import. That was a fun one. But if the MGN agent, for whatever reason, isn't working, you can export the VMDK or the OVA. If that's not working, you can install the MGN agentless option in your data center to take snapshots and do snapshot-based replication. There's a whole lot of different tools and utilities and configuration within the MGN tool. There are so many options within that tool just for orchestration and configuration of all of your new resources. It really, really behooves you to become familiar with it. That way you're ready. When it's time to move the production app or the 100 production apps, you're ready to go and you have everything as tuned and configured and staged as possible. So really, really looking into and sinking your teeth into MGN and leverage your account team. I cannot tell you the value that our account team brought to us as far as all of the steps. Multiple years ago, just getting started in AWS. 3 years ago, getting started with VMC. Now moving to EC2, and then everything along the way. You have a question about Direct Connect. You're not seeing a BGP route being advertised. Tell your account team. They put us on the phone with one of the back-end engineers who can see BGP routes on the Amazon side. So,
well, and another point to that, if you can make it work for you, if you've got a big enough workload, I mean, an enterprise support agreement does make a big difference with Amazon. I mean, it does get you to the right resources. It gets you a TAM. It gets you somebody who's advocating for you and with you as you're doing things. So, doing something like when you're doing a migration, pre-planning for that migration and making sure you've got all of your resource limits expanded, because there are resource limits on just about everything in Amazon, right? So,
we were the opposite. We don't. Stericycle at the time when we were doing our migration did not have an enterprise agreement. We were just on business support. So we still, as we opened the tickets, we had to, wait in queue.
Yeah.
But it didn't take very long. Most of the MGN ticket queues, they have a pretty quick turnaround within a few hours.
You mentioned a particular problem you had with one of your VMs. But,
yeah. So we had a weird VM. It's a legacy VM. I think it was 2008 R2. So yeah, that's another thing. Don't be afraid thinking like I have these really old VMs. We're not going to be able to synchronize them
Right.
up. We have VMs that we had to synchronize from 2003.
Right.
Yes, we're still running them. Do I want to? No. But we had to. We had to get it up there. So it supports all the way back to then, right? So, and it just as if it was a 2019 server, same process. Nothing changed. But yeah, we had a weird environment variable that somehow got entered in throughout the, I don't know how many years ago that somebody entered a weird environment variable. Somehow it got an upside down question mark. And MGN would install, but it would never actually send any data. It wouldn't synchronize. It would just sit there at 0%. So we opened a ticket, and within about 2 hours, the engineer looking through logs and was like, hey, do you see this environment variable here? I'm like, oh, yeah. So we deleted it,
What
and
is
as
that?
soon as we deleted it, rebooted the box, just started synchronizing.
Nice.
So yeah, they
So
were
good
really
experience
quick.
with support
And again,
on that.
we're not on at the time
Enterprise.
an enterprise support agreement, which was
I think an upside down question mark is one of the only alt codes I know.
Yeah.
It's alt 163, I think.
yeah. How it got there, I don't know. But again, a lot of legacy stuff.
Sounds
we
like
grew.
Frank did it.
Yeah.
Might have been.
Yeah, we
Can I-
grew by.
Yeah.
I was going to ask another question because I was going to bring something out. So for you guys, how many of you are thinking about bringing your Microsoft licenses to Amazon? Anybody thinking about that? See, well, at least a couple. Okay, so I mean, we did do that. It's somewhat challenging to do with native EC2 because you do have to use dedicated hosts, and there are some very arcane rules about which licenses you can bring and why for the Windows Server licensing. So make sure you understand that and that you know the limitations of that before you make that decision. Obviously, if you're in the middle of a contract, that's a good time to do it because you can continue to leverage those resources until that contract ends. Obviously, you need to think about it when that contract ends. And one limitation for sure is it's 2019 is the cutoff date, right? So if you can't install 2022 and bring your own server 22 or 2025 now and bring your own license, right? So if that's important to you, you want to consider that and understand the cost you pay for licensing for Microsoft and Amazon are probably higher than what you were paying for running it on your VMware environment on-prem, because the VMware environment on-prem, you're able to leverage some of that scale on the host. So just things to think about there.
Gotcha.
That was actually one of the reasons another reason we went to VMC initially is because of oversubscription. Because we could license at the host and we could oversubscribe the hardware, it made sense for us to do that at the time. And it was the faster path to get out of our data center.
I was saying that's
We
the other.
wanted to do that.
I'm saying that,
stopped.
yeah.
I personally think that news came at the exact right time for you.
I would agree. I would agree.
But-
We've been very happy with running on EC2.
What would have been worse is if you got a couple months in and then could suddenly no longer buy 3-year subscriptions
right?
on
Then I'd
hosts,
have to
right?
move again.
And
right.
but you already have a number of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and one
I think
other
you got
thing,
lucky.
Yeah, one other thing to keep in mind if you're coming from VMware, is you're used to kind of, hey, I can create any machine type I want, right? So I could have 2 CPUs and 256 gigs of RAM.
T-shirt sizing.
Which we do.
You can't do that in Amazon.
Yeah.
So in Amazon they've got some fixed things. So you got to look through a whole collection of them, find the one that works best for you, and sometimes you might need twice as many. You might need to put twice as many CPUs as you think
See a lot of new
to get the
instance
memory
types
you need.
being
Not,
released this week.
Yeah.
Not an Amazon native thing, so your mileage may vary, but I use a website called ec2instances.info, and it gives you a whole set of columns where you can type in, I need 2 CPUs and 30 gigs of RAM, and it will filter by what exact instance type is the cheapest to get what you're looking for.
Yep.
But yeah, it's understanding the difference in instance types.
Yeah.
You want 3 gigs and 3 CPUs and 96 gigs of RAM? VMware is like, okay.
Yeah. But you got to check your licensing on
Yeah,
that too,
yeah.
because some apps
Oh, yeah.
license SQL, example.
Yes.
Yes.
If you increase your CPU, you got to make sure you're relicensing
Gotcha.
accordingly. Yeah.
Yep. And other Microsoft licenses are a little easier to bring, but that's a different story.
So now that you all have migrated instances running in AWS, What are your thoughts about modernization? I mean, what's on the roadmap for each of you? Matt, at Stericycle, why don't you start out there?
Yeah, so modernization for us originally was just getting everything level set, and then eventually shifted gears to we don't want to manage hardware anymore. Right. We want to focus more on the app stack, the OS layer, and only. That's it. We don't care about anything else. Again, we have a very small team. I don't want a VM patch. I don't want to, again, worry about BIOS updates, any of that stuff. So for us, that was the first step. What we've done since we've moved up to Amazon, what was it, end of July? So between August 1st to today, we've now been focusing on the OS layer, app layer. So we've done, I don't know, probably about 40-ish VM upgrades since then, just in place upgrades or rebuilding a new VM and moving this, data, SQL data. We're mainly a Windows shop, a Microsoft shop, and moving the SQL data over to a newer OS, things along those lines. So we're trying to get off of some of the legacy stuff onto the newer supported OS versions, SQL versions.
Right. Real quick, I don't know if you know this, but as part of one of those nuances of MGN, there is an MGN, it's called a post-launch action,
Yes.
which it'll do something to your server after you migrate it. One of them is automatically update my OS.
Correct.
Now you should test that
Yes.
before doing it.
Yeah.
But like
There
you're
is,
saying,
yeah.
it's one of those nuances that can combine that into one process.
It's another feature of MGN. They do have a whole PostScript tool set. So as you cut your VM over, you can create your own scripts. You can use pre-canned ones that they have there. But for us, again, modernization is just really, right now we're mainly focusing on that, and then we're actually moving our entire ERP system over as well. So that's our next steps in our adventure.
What about Tribune, Matt?
Yeah, so for Tribune, I mean, as an organization, our goals have been more about not managing as much infrastructure anymore, right? So moving a lot of our applications to hosted applications or SaaS-based applications so that we can focus the limited IT resources that we have on managing what's important to the environment and making sure we're able to do that. So we're in the midst of migrating some of our line of business applications. I say line of business. So in our business, that's editorial, advertising, and circulation, and moving them to hosted solutions and anticipating that that's going to eliminate about another 50% of our VM infrastructure. And that allows my team to focus, again, on really just managing the core items that are there, and then start to think about how we leverage things we already purchased through other agreements, right? So we're a Google shop. I'm sure many of you are Google shops or Microsoft shops. You've got OneDrive, you've got SharePoint, you've got Google Drive. Why do I need file servers, right? So where can I get rid of some of those things and start moving those out? And
It's on our docket.
Yeah, but by getting that stuff, getting all this other management off of your plate, you can focus your team on doing those tasks and, again, bringing more value out of the tools you're already paying for. So,
yeah, as part of our migration, we when we got out of our data center, we just moved the entire NetApp to SharePoint and Teams. Whether or not that's what is the best solution, that's what we did to get rid of our file servers. But modernization for us, we are several years ago, before the actual migration of existing resources even started, all net new development, it was decided by senior leaders in our business units that all net new development was to be done on AWS and using AWS native technologies. So the goal was to be as native and as serverless as possible. And so all of our net new development has been going in that direction for years. And now that we have all of the legacy apps or VM-based apps running in AWS, whether in VMC or in EC2, our new developments are all AWS native with Lambda, Aurora, Dynamo, API Gateway, et cetera. And as customer contracts come up for renewals from those VM-based solutions to the next version that's AWS native, we're able to shut down those VMs and migrate them to the cloud-native platform that we've built in parallel while we were migrating.
That's fantastic. Look, this was really wonderful summary of each of your migration journeys. You all may be wondering how you can get started. We recommend the following steps. First, assess your VMware environment. We recommend an optimization and licensing assessment, an OLA, we call it, OLA. This will help you. You can save money. Even if you don't implement some of the things, you can learn ways to save money with that. You can leverage the AWS Partner Network. We have over 460 migration competency partners that are available to help you with your migrations. And then just decide, like was discussed here, you're going to do kind of a piecemeal, smaller migration or sort of an all at once. Maybe you're compelled to do so. Once you've decided on an approach, AWS can help you with training, support, services, purpose-built technologies, and specifically incentive programs as well. We didn't really talk much about that, but our MAP program.
The MAP program right now for VMC, specifically to EC2, is incredible. The public pricing on it is either $200 per VM if you migrate 40 or more, and $400 per VM if you migrate 80 or more in a month. And it's basically, your first 1 to 2 months free. And on top of that,
this is VMA you're talking about, isn't
this
it?
This is VMware to, or VMC to
the VMA program.
EC2, the VMA program. Yeah. And so on top of the 20% roughly that we're saving, that additional incentive is really helping us, keep rolling forwards.
Yeah, MAP program's huge.
Yeah, it's very, very helpful. And one thing to keep in mind if you're doing that program, its credits are quarterly and they're based on your previous quarter. So you'll see them over the course of a year, but you definitely will get some value out of that. And it helps fill those gaps where you're running things in two places, right? And having to pay for two sets of infrastructure.
Helps you also get where you can start to figure out what your trend's going to be within Amazon from a month to month, year to year cost. Helps reduce some of that burden.
Well, look, I wanted to leave you all with some QR codes for a few resources that should be really helpful. First is the AWS for VMware reInvent attendee guide. We have dozens of sessions happening this week that you should consider, focused on VMware customers and VMware workloads. Next is a link to getting started with the migration assessment. This will take you straight to the form to fill out your information and get in the queue to request it. It's complimentary. It'll help you reduce cost and build your business case for a migration. And finally, a link to the AWS for VMware website. This is where you should look to keep up with the latest developments and offerings. I mentioned the Elastic VMware service that we've just announced. In fact, we have added 2 special sessions to the catalog this week at reInvent, focused on Amazon Elastic VMware service, Amazon Elastic VMware service, EVS is what we're calling it. So I encourage you to attend. The first one is MAM237-new. This will be a deep dive session into Amazon Elastic VMware service. It's here at Caesars Forum on Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. That's MAM237-new. The other one is MAM119-new. That is Amazon Elastic VMware service. Start your modernization journey with AWS, which will be at the Mandalay Bay on Thursday at 2:30 p.m. So thank you all again for your time. And please, let's give special thanks to our panelists for sharing their journeys. It was really insightful. And please do remember to complete the session survey for this session. Our session is MAM104. Please, I would appreciate if you would do that. Thank you and enjoy your week at reInvent.